Welcome, committee members, staff presenters, and all who are watching on TVW to the Senate Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee meeting. For those following along, the committee will first hear. We'll hear from staff, and then we'll caucus, and then we'll enter executive session on a few bills, and then we will take the public hearing. With that, the committee is entering executive session. So staff, will you please brief the bills?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, the first bill up is Senate Bill 5466, Improving Reliability and Capacity of the Electric Transmission System in Washington State. The bill was heard Friday, January 31st. It establishes the Washington Electric Transmission Office within the Department of Commerce to support the expansion of and upgrades to the electric transmission system and be a statewide resource for transmission. It creates a 7-member advisory board to advise the office, and then it provides a categorical exemption from SEPA for upgrading or rebuilding existing transmission lines with reconductoring or grid enhancing technologies, and then it authorized the UTC to allow an incentive rate of return on investment of capital expenditures for grid enhancing technologies and reconductoring. There is one proposed substitute offered by Senator Shoemake labeled A. The effect of the sub is to create a separate Washington Electric Transmission Authority rather than an office within Commerce. It directs the authority to employ an executive director to be appointed by a board of directors. It changes the 7-member advisory board to a 9-member board of directors. It adds the 2 additional members, someone with knowledge of wildlife conservation and land use policies, as well as a member of a federally recognized Indian tribe. It transfers some of the duties initially assigned to an office to Commerce and some to the authority itself. It directs Commerce rather than the office to complete the initial 20-year transmission needs assessment by October of 2026, with updates to be completed by the authority. It adds some components to the needs assessment, including to engage proactively in conversations with neighboring states, to coordinate interconnection planning and development that supports regional resource adequacy, and to access least cost resources. It directs Commerce to consider integrated resource plans and to avoid, to the greatest extent practicable, duplicate plans or related analysis already provided by regional or federal entities. It directs Commerce rather than the office to consult with bond counsel and prepare requested legislation or request legislation to establish the bonding authority for the authority by November 1st of 2025 rather than October of 2026. And then it authorizes the authority to serve as a SEPA lead and tribal consultation lead under a partnership, and to adopt criteria and rule for an initial and an annual local investment commitment fee for high voltage projects that the authority develops, owns, or sells in order to distribute the fees among counties, cities, towns, and tribes in proportion to a project's impact. It specifies that the authority's ownership of electric transmission may not exceed the extent and duration necessary or useful to promote the public interest and must include a plan for divestment prior to becoming an owner. It modifies the categorical exemption to SEPA to include the upgrading or rebuilding of existing electric power lines as long as the actions involve relocations of small segments of the power lines within an existing right-of-way or within adjacent previously disturbed or developed lands, or widening an existing power line right-of-way to meet current electrical standards if it remains within previously disturbed or developed lands. It specifies that for a project that is categorically exempt, the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation may require a survey to be done in coordination with the affected tribe, and that information provided by the tribe must be kept confidential and exempt from public disclosure. It authorizes the UTC to allow an incentive rate of return on investment of capital expenditures for grid enhancing technologies and reconductoring for a period up to 15 years instead of the depreciable life of the investment. And then finally, it removes the UTC's authority to allow a rate of return on investment made to upgrade transmission lines owned and operated by the Bonneville Power Administration, where an investor-owned utility has exclusive use to the transmission service on the line. Any questions?
Amazingly, no questions. That was such a...
Okay, moving on to Senate Bill 5514. This bill is increasing the compliance pathways for the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. You heard it last Wednesday on February 12th. The bill authorizes Commerce to adopt additional compliance pathways to comply with the State Energy Performance Standard by meeting an alternative metric rather than the energy use intensity target. There is one proposed sub offered by Senator Shoemake labeled B. The effect is to add K-12 school buildings to the list of financial hardships for exemptions when actual materials, supplies, and operating costs known as MSOC exceed funding appropriated from the state, or when the building is forced to leverage local levy dollars to cover MSOC costs. And then it adds that an extension is valid for 2 years beyond the compliance date, and after 2 years, the building can apply for an extension renewal or file for an exemption. And it directs that penalties incurred from non-compliance cannot be passed along to tenants. And then there is a page and line amendment offered to the sub, also by Senator Shoemake, labeled B1. And it removes the references to MSOC under the list of financial hardships for K-12 school building exemptions, and instead adds financial hardships related to capital construction or improvements, including a failed bond and or levy for K-12 school buildings as a reason for an exemption under the standard. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
Okay. Senate Bill 5450 establishes new reporting requirements at the Department of Ecology for sewage-containing spills. There's a proposed substitute labeled C offered by Senator Slatter, and it does the following things. It eliminates the requirement that information about sewage spills be posted by the Department of Ecology, specifically in a map format with geographic information, and instead specifies that the sewage spill information communicated to the public must only include a notice of the location of the spill. It limits the daily hours in which Ecology must post sewage spill information within 4 hours of receipt to regular working business hours of 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday and excluding holidays. The substitute amends the definition of the combined sewers and sewage spills to which the reporting requirements apply, including by specifying that sewage spills apply to discharges of wastewater rather than diversions of waste. It eliminates references to diversions and bypasses of sewage rather than sewage spills. It eliminates the requirement that Ecology post in sewage spill notices information about public safety precautions that should be taken. And it eliminates the requirement that Ecology retain post-2026 sewage spill notices on their website in perpetuity. Any questions? Moving on, Senate Bill 5494 authorizes the Department of Commerce to administer and enforce a state-based renovation, repair, and painting program for lead-based paint. The bill grants Commerce the authority to adopt fees for the lead-based paint programs and eliminates the statutory established fee. There are no amendments. And finally, from me, Senate Bill 5628 modifies the lead and cookware program that the legislature passed last year. You have a proposed substitute offered by Senator Harris labeled D. The proposed substitute makes the following changes. It modifies the definition of cookware in the following ways. It adds in utensils. It excludes refrigerators or other large appliances that do not have metal surfaces that are intended for contact with food. The substitute defines inaccessible components and specifies that lead in inaccessible components is excluded from the requirements under the statute. And it eliminates language from the original bill modifying the manufacturer liability. Any questions?
The next bill is Senate Bill 5359, accelerating the development of clean energy and transmission. It was heard Friday, January 31st. It establishes a clean energy development office within the Department of Commerce to provide information plans and support clean energy projects and electric transmission facilities. It creates a work group to identify best practices and develop tools for siting and permitting large-scale battery energy storage systems. And it requires Commerce to support local governments integrating clean energy development into into planning and zoning requirements under the Growth Management Act. There's one proposed sub offered by Senator Shoemake labeled F. The effect is to remove the Clean Energy Development Office and instead establish clean energy siting and development as a priority for Commerce. It directs Commerce to engage in specified activities rather than the office. It removes specific authorization for several activities such as to develop and make available geospatial and visualization tools. It also removes supporting transmission planning and development. It authorizes rather than requires Commerce to convene a work group to identify best practices and develop tools for siting and permitting large-scale batteries. It authorizes rather than requires Commerce to support local governments integrating clean energy into planning and zoning requirements under GMA and to provide alternative dispute resolution services. It does specify that if any information is provided by a federally recognized tribe as part of an alternative dispute resolution service, it must be kept confidential and exempt from public disclosure.
Senator Lovelett has a question.
Thank you. Do we have an updated fiscal note for this then?
We don't yet, but it's depending on the action the committee takes, we'll request one.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Next up is Senate Bill 5033, relates to sampling or testing of biosolids for PFAS chemicals. You heard this bill on February 7th. As a quick reminder, the bill requires Ecology to establish PFAS chemical sampling or testing requirements for certain biosolids by July 1st, 2027. Requires Ecology to complete an analysis of the PFAS chemical levels in certain biosolids by July 1st, 2028. Directs Ecology to report a summary of that analysis and make recommendations to the legislature by December 1st, 2028, and establishes an advisory committee of representative stakeholders with which Ecology must consult before adopting or amending rules relating to sampling or testing biosolids for PFAS. There is a proposed substitute labeled F offered by Senator Lovelett, which extends the dates in the bill by 1 year. So the sampling testing requirements would be July 1st, 2028, the analysis in July 1st, 2029, and the report in December 1st, 2029. It adds representatives of local governments to the advisory committee and specifies that utilities producing soil amendments include special purpose districts, municipal utility providers, and public utility districts. And it removes proposed language providing that the legislation does not affect water discharge permits or restricts a local government from addressing contamination by PFAS chemicals. And there are no other amendments.
Senator Wellman has a question.
I think we're following along on fiscal notes quite deliberately. And would you expect that the fiscal note on this would change because of the amendment?
It would be possibly pushed a little later because of the dates in the bill.
The substance would be the same.
I think so. It's not. It's adding representatives to an advisory committee. But yeah, as far as without looking at the fiscal note, what is driving the fiscal note is the report, the sampling, the testing, the reporting, and everything. So it'd push it out a year. Okay. But that would be requested after this. Yeah.
If I may, Madam Chair. Yeah, I have the fiscal note open here, and it's 2 FTEs at Ecology to manage the program. And so we did, for their ability to comply, but also to push it out to, yeah.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions. With that, we will break for caucus. So the committee will go at ease for the purpose of caucus. Do I need to? Yeah, here we go. All right. So because we are within 5 days of cutoff, there is no 24-hour hold on signature sheets. As we go forward, we will start with 5466. We have Senate Bill 5466 before us. There's a proposed substitute labeled A, offered by Senator Shoemake.
Madam Chair, I move adoption of the proposed substitute.
Is there any discussion? This is a bill about keeping the lights on, so let's keep the lights on. All in favor of keeping the lights? No. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The proposed substitute is adopted.
Madam Chair, I move that the proposed substitute receive due pass recommendation be sent to the Ways and Means Committee.
Is there any discussion? Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, you want to go first? Thank you, Madam Chair. Some of the concerns we see when we appreciate a lot of the work, because when you look at amendments like this in the proposed sub and even the amendment on this shows the work from several stakeholders in this room and others who aren't here today. So speaking to that, we really appreciate everybody staying on board, really moving the needle on this going forward. There are still concerns on our sides about eminent domain and a lot of the other areas that maybe have overreach on some of the authority that we're concerned about, but we're willing to work to see what some of those details really are in this as it moves forward. So going to be a no vote today, but looking forward to working and continue to thank the stakeholders staying on board with this as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that commitment to work together. I'm still asking for a yes vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The bill has passed subject to signatures. We have Senate Bill 5514 before us. There is a proposed substitute labeled B offered by Senator Shoemake. There is an amendment labeled B1 offered by Senator Shoemake.
Madam Chair, I move adoption of amendment labeled B1 to the proposed sub.
Is there any discussion? It's a little amendment clarifying some what financial hardship looks like for school districts. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The amendment to the proposed substitute has passed.
Madam Chair, I move that the amendment be rolled into a new proposed substitute and that it receive a due pass recommendation be sent to the Rules Committee.
Is there any discussion? Still a good bill.
Still a good bill. We agree on this piece, but we may be a little mixed on this side. Some people like the opportunity because we see this when we're in Ways and Means and other parts of the budget and looking at MSOC as being critical to our schools. We're hearing that loud and clear across the Capitol, across the state this year especially. We got to get some relief to our schools as much as we can. Still some issues with the bill that we want to work on, so that we may be a little mixed on this side.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The bill has passed subject to signatures. We have Senate Bill 5450 before us. There is a proposed substitute labeled C offered by Senator Slatter.
Madam Chair, I move adoption of the proposed substitute.
Thank you very much. Is there any discussion?
Thank you so much for being open to transparency and information regarding sewage spills, which can be quite damaging to our environment and certainly not safe for people swimming in waters. And we tried to skinny the bill quite a bit to be able to address budget issues, and so I urge your support.
Yeah.
Sorry, a lot of our concerns really on this one was divulging at least rate and at least the acknowledgments of rates when they're increasing, at least some of this when it goes into spills, the definition of them, where it means to obfuscate that from the Senate down to state agencies, have some concerns with our members. So we want to make sure that stays at the state level and not push that down to the agency level.
Thank you very much. I'm asking for a yes vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The proposed substitute is adopted. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the proposed substitute receive a due pass recommendation be sent to the Ways and Means Committee.
Is there any discussion?
No.
Good bill, vote. Good bill, vote yes. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The bill has passed subject to signatures. We now have Senate Bill 5494 before us. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the bill receive a due pass recommendation be sent to the Ways and Means Committee.
Is there any discussion? Good bill, vote yes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The bill has passed subject to signatures. We now have Senate Bill 5628 before us. There is a proposed substitute labeled D offered by Senator Harris.
Madam Chair, I move adoption of the proposed substitute.
Is there any discussion? Just pass it. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The proposed substitute is adopted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the proposed substitute receive a due pass recommendation be sent to the Ways and Means Committee.
Is there any discussion? Good bill, vote yes. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The bill is passed subject to signatures. We have Senate Bill 5359 before us. There's a proposed substitute labeled E offered by Senator Shoemake. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move adoption of the proposed substitute.
Is there any discussion? We're still working on this bill, but hopefully it helps us build some clean energy. All in favor, vote say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The proposed substitute is adopted. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the proposed substitute receive a due pass recommendation be sent to the Ways and Means Committee.
Is there any discussion? Good bill, vote yes. All in favor, say aye. Opposed, nay. The bill is passed subject to signatures. We have Senate Bill 5033 before us. There is a proposed substitute labeled F offered by Senator Lovelet. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move adoption of the proposed substitute.
Is there any discussion? Good bill, vote yes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The proposed substitute is adopted. Madam Vice Chair.
Madam Chair, I move that the proposed substitute receive a due pass recommendation be sent to the Ways and Means Committee.
Is there any discussion? Good bill, vote yes. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The bill has passed subject to signatures. So that ends our executive session. And we will move to the public hearing. And remember, you need to sign the bills. There's no 24-hour hold on signature sheets. So if you can give us a briefing on 5652.
Good afternoon again. Senator Shoemake, members of the committee, Alicia Kinney-Clausen, staff to this committee. Before you is Senate Bill 5652, establishing certain planning and mitigation requirements related to environmental health in large port districts. For context, port districts and special purpose districts are empowered to acquire, construct, maintain, operate, develop, and regulate harbor improvements, rail, motor, or water transfer and terminal facilities, and air transfer terminal facilities, among other things. The bill before you applies to a port district referred to as a qualifying port district with a noise abatement program. Sea-Tac Airport is the only airport in the state currently required to conduct a noise abatement program. A qualifying port district must include an environmental justice implementation plan within its strategic plan. The plan must apply the principles of environmental justice to port district activities. Specific requirements for the environmental justice plan are detailed in the bill. A qualifying port district must also create and adopt a community engagement plan. The plan must describe how the port will engage with overburdened and vulnerable populations. Requirements for the community engagement plan are specified in the bill. Finally, a qualifying port district is required to complete an adverse impacts assessment for any port action involving a capital improvement project purchase or construction of $8 million or more in value, or if the project increases the number of gates at an airport. Among other requirements, the adverse impacts assessment must obtain an assessment from the University of Washington's Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences in collaboration with the county in which the project is located on the likely adverse cumulative impacts of the proposed action on overburdened communities and vulnerable populations that will be affected by the action, taken together with recommendations on ways to mitigate or minimize the likely cumulative impacts of the proposed action. Based on the assessment, a qualifying port district must seek, to the extent legal and feasible, to reduce or eliminate the environmental harms and maximize the environmental benefits of the significant port action. Specific methods for reducing the environmental harm or distributing the environmental benefits that must be considered by the port are specified in the bill. The University of Washington's Department of Environmental Health and Occupational Health must periodically review and evaluate the effectiveness of the mitigation strategies undertaken by the port and report on the outcomes. A fiscal note has been requested and is not yet available.
I don't see any questions. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to bring up the prime sponsor, Senator Orwell. Tell us about your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Tina Orwell, State Senator from the 33rd Legislative District, and thank you for hearing the bill today. I raised my kids in South King County. It's beautiful. It's the most diverse area of King County. And I remember my son used to come home from school with horrible asthma attacks, and I kept thinking, that school must have mold. And it didn't occur to me till years later when we realized we have a very high incident of asthma around our community. And Senator Karen Kaiser and I teamed up and we funded a study at UW called the Move Up Study. And they had looked at other airports like LAX and Atlanta, and they did a footprint of Sea-Tac. And what they found is there's very high concentrations of ultrafine particles of the Jet A fuel, and they're very concentrated. And we know that these can lead to, asthma, heart conditions. And then the King County Department of Health started looking at our health disparities from King County. And the closer you live to the airport, the lower your lifespan, from 10 to 5 to 1 mile. And this includes areas that are very affluent. And so we started looking at this and working with UW and King County. One of the things that happened that was really very tragic for our community is we had a 12-year-old girl who had out-of-control asthma, and she died in an ambulance on the way to Children's. And so we got money from the climate change to do asthma intervention. And I think what we're learning is there's things we can do. So they go in, they provide HEPA filters, HEPA vacuums, they do interventions, and they've had a huge success reducing asthma of emergency departments, of, all of these secondary things that happen. And so the reason this bill is before you is not only are we still impacted by Sea-Tac and needing more noise and air mitigation, but they're undergoing a huge expansion. And so, from our perspective, like I could tell you there's certain parts of the day that there's a plane coming over every 45 seconds. And I think with GPS and NextGen, they have a way of stacking a lot more planes. And so now the airport is looking to expand gates to accommodate probably technology and how many flights can go in. So, the community is here today to really ask the airport, can you be a good neighbor? Right? Can we be working together to mitigate through noise, through air quality, to help the health of the community? And, again, I'd say that the three most important parts, I would say, from what's in front of you, one is we created the port, and they're very successful. They bring in, I think, $22 billion a year. They have a huge number of passengers. They're expanding. They're great for economics. But they're also a governmental entity, and we'd like them to also care about the health and well-being at a system level, right? There's great individuals that work for the airport. We also, the second thing is, I think it'd be very helpful to have that third party like University of Washington looking at this. They've been looking at mitigation. They have expertise on how you monitor, how you monitor what's effective. And the third thing, which isn't in front of you yet, but the staff have been working on, is a potential funding source. And I know a number of years ago I talked to Representative Fitzgibbon about this, is there is a tax on aviation fuel, and that comes back to the state. There's a small increase every year, and one of the things the FAA said is not enough of that money is coming back to the airport. And if we took that tiny increase every year and put it in a mitigation fund, that would build over time to help us pay for mitigation in our community. It would be a very stable source over time. So that's what I'd ask you to consider. I want to thank all the community members. I want to have an open dialogue. I know we're a great state, and I travel. I love to travel, so it's not about not appreciating our airlines. It's really about how do we keep the community around the airport healthy. So thanks for your consideration.
Senator Slatter.
Thank you so much, Senator Orwell. Really thoughtful presentation. I just wanted to ask you about the University of Washington that you spoke about in the health disparities map. It's got the occupational and environmental, but it doesn't have the Department of Health, or doesn't have any sort of like a specific health entity. So I'm curious about that. Mm-hmm. I'm also curious about how this is breaking out from like the traffic, for example, that flows into Sea-Tac, and how that can be separated out from what we're talking about with fine particulates. Thanks.
Great question, Senator. The two things I would say is what happened with the University of Washington is they worked collaboratively with King County Department of Health, right? And like King County Department of Health led with all the asthma intervention, but UW went in and they researched how much the particles decreased indoors, and we found it in our schools and in the homes that 80% of the particles can be removed if you have the right purifiers. So they're there kind of as a research entity looking and measuring air quality. The second thing is when they did One thing to know is that the highest concentrations are upon landing. So we used to talk about aviation fuel, but it depends on where they're fueled. And what they have found is that you can distinguish between the particles from automobiles from Jet A fuel. They're very distinct. And so we actually have monitors that we're setting up in our area with Puget Sound Clean Air and UW looking and distinguishing those ultrafine particles. Yeah.
I don't see any questions, but thank you, Senator Orwell. And I will turn it over to Vice Chair Slatter to begin the public testimony. Unless, do you want me to start it? Yep. Okay. Let us call up, hold on, Maria Battiola, Brian Davis. And you can begin when you're ready.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Senators. Thank you first for your service and for your time. My name is Brian Davis. I'm a resident of Burien, requesting your approval of Senate Bill 5652. A high percentage of our city's residents belong to communities the state classifies as vulnerable. A significant number of those people live beneath the flight path to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Through my service on the Burien Airport Committee, it has become clear that the Port of Seattle systematically avoids discussion of negative environmental impacts from airport operations. An airport expansion plan now on the table would create a 28% increase in aircraft traffic at Sea-Tac by 2034. But the port sidestepped the question of impact on residents and surrounding communities by restricting its analysis of the project to the airport campus itself. This is disingenuous. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency did perform an environmental justice analysis, finding, and I'll quote here from its rather pointed response to the port, that the proposed project is located within an area with EJ concerns and that these communities face significant environmental disparities. The EPA has concerns that the historically overburdened nature of the area, coupled with any increase in emissions and noise exposure, could result in significant disproportionate adverse impacts. We understand that expansion at Sea-Tac fuels economic growth that benefits our entire region, but its neighbors pay a disproportionate price for that growth. This legislation would go a long way toward addressing and correcting that injustice, and so I ask that you please vote yes on 5652. And with that, I'll yield to my fellow panelist, Ms. Battiola.
Thank you so much, Honorable Chair Schumake and Vice Chair Vandera Slaughter. I love the title of this bill, Reducing Health Disparities, and that's what I'm going to focus on for today. My name is Maria Battiola, and I chair Sea-Tac Airport Community Coalition for Justice. Our coalition includes Beacon Hill Council, El Centro de la Raza, King County Airport Community Coalition, and 350 Seattle Aviation Team. We work with many people of color, immigrants, and refugee community partners. Our vision is a healthy aviation communities and healthy workers. Sea-Tac airport flights impact close to 500,000 residents who live near the airport in Burien, Des Moines, Federal Way, Normandy Park, Renton, Sea-Tac, and Tukwila, as well as under its related flight paths, Beacon Hill, Georgetown, Duwamish, Skyway, White Center, and Chinatown International District. It is a health disparities issue because these residents include 64% people of color, 29% immigrants and refugees, 22% vulnerable children, and 12% elders. Hence, our concerns for overall health and health disparities that have cumulative over time. Our community members can share with you what we call their lived experience of health, environmental, and climate harms. But today, we really want to highlight to your committee the health disparities documented in the 2020 King County Public Health Report entitled Community Health and Airport Operations Related to Noise and Air Pollution, as requested by your state legislature. Sadly, life expectancy is lower by 5 years for those living within 1 mile of Sea-Tac Airport, 3.5 years shorter within 5 miles, and 1.7 years for those living within 10 miles of Sea-Tac Airport. And that living is working, playing, studying. Second is more people of color within their respective ethnic groups reside in the cities around the airport because of the affordable housing. Third is the health disparities caused by aviation air and noise pollution include respiratory, that's asthma, cancer and central nervous system problems. Noise and air pollution cause cardiovascular problems. Ultrafine particles are likely to cause low birth weight, as evidenced by an 8-year study at LAX. They're not monitored, nor are they regulated. Other impacts include sleep disturbance, lower educational achievement in math and reading, and of course that's contributed with the absences due to asthma as well as attention disturbance. There is limited noise pollution mitigation, as you well know, and no air pollution mitigation program. Our vulnerable communities of color, immigrants, refugees are impacted harder and faster as evidenced by COVID pandemic experience. Senate Bill 5652, Reducing Health Disparities, will require front-end environmental justice review for significant Port of Seattle actions and reduce or eliminate the environmental pollution and the exacerbation of health disparities. The proposed bill provides environmental justice definition and tools that mirror the existing HEAL Act, Healthy Environment for All. It doesn't ask the port to do any more or any less than what the state requires. We respectfully ask for unanimous passage of SB 5652 out of your committee. Salamat po.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Are there any questions? Thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you.
I don't see any questions. Obviously very thorough.
Thank you.
Could we call up John Flanagan and Eric Fitch, and could we start with a 2-minute timer, please?
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Slatter, Ranking Member Banky, members of the committee. I'm Eric Fitch. I'm the Executive Director at the Washington Public Ports Association, here today opposed to Senate Bill 5652. More than 100 years ago, I won't take that long, the legislature passed the Port Districts Act and created a unique type of government in Washington, public port districts, independently governed and charged by the legislature with operating transportation facilities. Operation of those facilities involves good environmental stewardship, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a port that's made more investments in environmental programs than the Port of Seattle. The ports authorities have evolved over time. Many of our ports now act as economic development entities, but at our core, ports' mission is simple, providing transportation options to the people of Washington, operating transportation facilities like marine terminals, marinas, railroads, and airports. Airports are essential public facilities. They are places where Washingtonians go to travel to see loved ones, to connect with friends in far-flung places, to travel to access medical care, and to travel for work. And they're places where people go to work. More than 30 of our ports operate airports. 7 of those ports operate airports that are an integral part of the commercial service network. Those ports and the communities they represent see every day the impact of congestion at our state's primary commercial service airport. Senate Bill 5652 adds a maze of murky permitting processes to the already difficult work of developing these facilities. It will make it more difficult for our state to meet the existing demand for commercial aviation services. Airport operators do not drive demand, they respond to public demand, to people wanting to travel. That means longer lines, less reliable service, and fewer transportation options for Washington, and for that reason we're opposed to Senate Bill 5652. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Shoemake, Ranking Member Banky, members of the committee. For the record, John Flanagan, Port of Seattle, testifying today as well in opposition to Senate Bill 5652. In 2019, the Port of Seattle became the first port authority in the country to formally partner with the near port community to specifically address environmental justice issues. In 2023, the port and members of those communities joined together for our first joint legislative advocacy trip to Washington, D.C. And this year, a group of near port community members joined me here in Olympia for our first state-level lobby day to advocate for a set of shared legislative priorities that we adopted adopted at the end of 2024. To our knowledge, we're the only port, and SEA is the only airport in the country that actually does these kinds of things. The Port of Seattle is not opposed to improving environmental justice outcomes. We don't shy away from community engagement. However, the impacts of this legislation go far beyond those worthy pursuits. I'll start by saying that the impacts of this legislation actually aren't limited to the airport, by the way, but that is where obviously folks will spend most of their time this afternoon. Per the definition of significant port action provided in the bill, the entirety of the port's operations would theoretically be subject to the various new requirements and processes created, then assessed on a project-by-project basis. It's unclear to us how we would actually implement the bill before you today, and we also question the value of individually assessing port actions rather than taking a holistic system-wide approach. If enacted, the bill would create substantial delays and generate costs for ongoing and future capital construction projects at the airport. It would hamper our transition towards sustainable aviation fuels. It would threaten our ability to conclude airport projects in time for the World Cup, and it would contribute to increasingly degraded service at our state's largest transportation hub. As a reminder, the Port of Seattle does not decide the number of planes or in any way dictate the market for commercial air travel. Efforts to delay capital projects at the airport or to prevent the port from constructing new commercial service gates will not mean fewer planes. Instead, it will mean the exact same amount of air travel into our region without giving us the ability to accommodate it. I'll stop there and send the rest of my remarks in follow-up. Thanks.
I have a question. So when you look at, do you look at health disparities right now in your processes? I guess I'm curious about
And
that.
simple answer is yes. And we actually, as an institution, we are also building an environmental justice assessment tool that should be implemented on a system level basis within the port in the future.
Okay, so what does that materially look like? What do we, are you evaluating its outcomes as well? Because I know that was something that is in this bill.
Right.
So I'm curious about that.
I would point you instead to, let's talk about SAMP for a second. So the Sustainable Airport Master Plan is currently finalizing the NEPA process. As part of the NEPA process, it's gone through rounds of environmental analysis, identification of potential adverse impacts, and mitigation per federal law. After the NEPA process ends, it will go through the SEPA process, which has a very similar state-level corollary. Although specific environmental justice outcomes are not called out in either NEPA or SEPA in that way, yes, we are doing identification of environmental harms and mitigation.
In terms of health outcomes?
I can't speak to that specifically, but I can follow up and find out for absolutely certain.
I think that would be important. Sure. Thank you. Do you have anything to add on that? Or
No, I think that our ports take seriously that environmental commitment I referenced in my testimony, and so NEPA and SEPA is a focus for all of our project delivery. I think the Port of Seattle's specific efforts on SAMP go significantly further, and so I don't have much more to add to what John said.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I don't see further questions or hear further questions. So I'm going to call up Alethea Miller, Morgan Irwin, and Jennifer Ziegler.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Jennifer Ziegler here today on behalf of the Aerospace Futures Alliance. Just for you all to know, the Alliance represents almost 100 aerospace supplier companies as well as related organizations that range in size from mom and pop shops to full original equipment manufacturers. We're testifying in opposition to this bill today. In particular, one of our legislative priorities is the state's investment in sustainable aviation fuel and really growing that infrastructure to make sure Washington's a leader in that area. Our concern stems from the fact that we think that this legislation will undermine the efforts that the port's undertaking within the Sustainable Aviation Master Plan to invest and really quickly progress in those sustainable aviation fuel investments. And so we would encourage you to not support the bill. Thank you.
Morgan Irwin, representing Association Washington Business, also signed in con on the bill. When we look at the 7,000 plus business members of the Association Washington Business, 65% of those are 25 employees or less. And we go all the way up to the top and all the way down to the bottom in terms of our company sizes that are members. And when we look at the Port of Seattle, we see this is the spigot that waters the garden. And if we limit that, if we turn that down, if we turn that off, then the garden doesn't grow. And so we see this as having the potential to have a direct impact on many of our member businesses, and as such, we're signed in con. Thank you.
Question from Senator Lovelet.
How will the garden grow when there's so much pollution that the plants can't live?
It's a reasonable question, and as John testified before us, I don't think that you could find an airport on the West Coast or maybe even in the country that's done more to mitigate environmental impacts than Sea-Tac Airport. They're a model that's used by other countries around the world as what they hope to attain someday, and I think that they are committed to that. I think the Port Commissioners in King County are committed to that, and rather than stymieing that, I think we can look at them as a worldwide leader in environmental sustainability for an airport.
Thank you so much. Alethea Miller, I think, is on remote.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, Chair Shoemake and members of the committee. My name is Alethea Miller, and I'm the State and Local Government Affairs Manager at Alaska Airlines. Thank you for the opportunity to express our concerns with Senate Bill 5652, a bill that we believe could result in significant delays and increased costs for much-needed improvements at Alaska's largest airport hub. We're headquartered in Washington State, where we employ more than 11,000 people, and Alaska Airlines is committed to supporting the airports and the communities that we serve. In recent years, we've invested heavily in improvements to reduce the negative impacts of our operations and to drive efficiencies. This includes purchasing of newer, more fuel-efficient aircraft, use of new technology to improve flight operations and reduce fuel usage, and our continued work to advance the sustainable aviation fuel industry. Alaska and the Port of Seattle have completed and embarked on several significant capital projects at the SEA airport, representing hundreds of millions of dollars in investments. These projects are designed to improve the guest experience and increase the capacity and efficiency of the airport environment to meet demand. Projects like these support Alaska's complex operation at the SEA airport and are vital to our ability to compete with other carriers and grow, including launching new service to global destinations. The requirements in Senate Bill 5652 are severe and have the potential to delay or even halt Alaska's priority major capital infrastructure projects at the SEA airport, all of which have a budget exceeding the $8 million threshold set forth in the bill. While we share the legislature's goal of promoting environmental sustainability, we are concerned with the outcome of Senate Bill 5652 and what it would have on the travel experience and our ability to invest in critical transportation infrastructure and our region's largest and most important airport. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you so much. Could we have Sarah Moore on Zoom, and on deck would be Lance Eggers.
Hi.
Go ahead, we can hear you and see you.
Awesome, thank you. This is Sarah Moore. I'm speaking on my own behalf today, but I want to recognize that I do serve as a deputy mayor in the city of Burien and as chair of the Burien Airport Committee. The work I do in those two spaces informs my thoughts on this issue. I'm speaking pro for Senate Bill 5652. Burien and other communities near Sea-Tac Airport are subject to noise and ultrafine particle pollution from both the airport itself and the ground transportation, which carries goods and people to and from the port. These impacts exacerbate and build on each other. Our neighborhoods are fragmented with areas uninhabitable due to proximity and road traffic bisecting neighborhoods and creating pockets of more deeply impacted properties. The port is growing, and it brings with it economic, commercial, and cultural richness, which we've heard about today. This same growth imposes on the communities closest to the growth hub is both an equitable and a action, as you're investing in a community that will support future growth if you handle current growth with an eye on environmental justice for those closest to the harm. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Sarah, you went in and out just a little bit, so if you have an opportunity to mail or email your remarks, that would be great.
I will. Thank you.
Okay, Lance is not on Zoom, so if I could have Ann Croker. If you can hear me, go ahead and unmute, Ann.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome, we can hear you and see you.
Thank you so much. My name is Ann Craker. I am under the Flight Path resident and a 350 Seattle member. A little personal background at why I care so much, and then why I care even more, is that for myself and my husband, the noise and worry about our health impacts is intolerable, and we find excuses to not be at our house or anywhere under the flight paths. We don't have like inviting people over. We don't want to have our children and families visit too long. We know we have to move from what was to be our retirement home, but we also know that despite our home not able to be valued for what it should be if it were not under the flights, we can absorb that cost, but all these other people cannot who would like to move. So they also may have to work or recreate outside under this constant barrage and low-flying jet engine particle fallout. This bill would serve them. As you've heard, there's so many folks who are impacted disproportionately under these paths. The Port of Seattle says that they are serving these communities, but they are not. We need to have environmental justice spelled out for the port and then set up and monitored by a respected and vetted third party, as you have heard. And more than ever, we need to say environmental justice and say it loudly, because our national conversation is trying to dismantle institutions who are trying to achieve this necessary goal. And we can't let this happen. Thank you for hearing and acting on this bill.
Thank you so much. Could we have Tracy Buxton, please? And while we're doing that, if J.C. Harris is here, why don't you come on up to be on deck? Go ahead, Tracy.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Shoemake and distinguished members of the Senate Environment, Energy, and Technology Committee. My name is Tracy Buxton. I'm the mayor of Des Moines. A big thank you to Senator Orwell for introducing this bill, which we very much support. And for common sense reasons, here's why. Imagine for a moment yourself, your kids, your grandkids visiting Sea-Tac Airport. It's a sunny day on the tarmac behind Alaska Air, and you're getting a tour. They have set up a small portable playground, cozy chairs, and they're going to be serving you lunch. However, you're also only a few blocks directly downwind of a jet plane that is revving and testing its engines for the afternoon. How would you feel about that sound and that warm jet breeze wafting past your table and your kids? Would you decide to stay for lunch, or would you just go with your gut? How would you feel if you didn't think you had a choice? The operations at Sea-Tac replicate this setting about 600 times per day over the city of Des Moines, and that is pre-expansion. Every single household in my city is flight affected. This bill allows the Port of Seattle the ability to do assessments and expand its mitigation dollars to help people whose health is impacted by flight operations. This can have a huge effect on the quality of life for many people in Des Moines and other communities that exist in the dense, close-in residential shadow of Sea-Tac, unlike almost every other airport in the country, and growing fast. Even if you might not agree with the details at this point, do a good thing. Move this bill forward, give it an opportunity to live, and to get any helpful amendments moving forward. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much. J.C. Harris? Go ahead.
My name is J.C. Harris. I represent SeatacNoise.info. We do a lot of things. One is provide a history of the airport. We are referred to as sort of the Wikipedia of Sea-Tac, for what that's worth. You have heard about the economic benefits of the airport, and they are very real. According to the port's own budget, by 2029, the airport operations will be $200 million cash positive, and that includes SAMP CapEx. So I think they definitely have the necessary funds to do more. They are also the largest air polluter in King County, and depending on who you ask, the second in the state. SB5652 provides a mechanism to help the communities in the following way. The current airport expansion, which the port is following meticulously, provides no consideration of community air impacts beyond the fence line. Let me say that again. It provides no consideration of community impacts beyond airport property. One more time. In one of the most densely populated areas in the United States, it provides no consideration for any kind of environmental impacts beyond the property line. No bill is perfect. We would prefer to see additional options for city governments to participate in this assessment. We would remind the committee that the airport sits on a plateau and is the primary source of groundwater for the entire area, and airports used thousands of gallons of PFAS for many decades, among other things. We strongly support this bill, and we want to thank you for your consideration.
Thank you so much. I don't see any questions. Senator Harris has a question.
So you made a point of, I guess, the line of where, I guess, the airline is on where it stops at the port property. Is that standard in the United States? In other words, so I'm in the flight pattern of PDX. I live a mile inside the state of Washington. And PDX is very similar, actually, not quite as large as Seattle, but I was just looking at the flight numbers, it's a little bit behind them. So I'm trying to figure out if this is standard operation, is what's happening in Seattle any different than Portland as far as where that line is? And
it's very standard. The way that NEPA and SEPA consider airports is like a construction project, like any office building, okay? Instead of considering it for what it is, like a smokestack, where you would be required to consider the impacts on your neighbors, not only in different cities, but perhaps across different states. It's a loophole both in state and federal law. We gave preferential treatment to airports because of their importance to the economy. But there is no consideration beyond the fence line. And this bill is an attempt to address that. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. Could we promote Sanayat Naguse? And then while that is happening, if we could have Steve Edmiston on deck. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Chair Shoemake, Vice Chair Slater, and Ranking Member Wilkie and committee members. I am Sanayat Naguse, Sea-Tac City Council member, and I'm here today testifying in support of Senate Bill 5652. I want to start off by thanking Senator Orwell for bringing this bill forward. As you all have heard, we are in the heart of one of the busiest airports in the country. 42% of our city is made up of airport property. And so the impact on our residents is significant. They deal with the constant noise, air pollution, and traffic, which affect their health, homes, and quality of life, as you've heard here today. Many of our families don't have the resources to fix the problems that are caused by the airport's operations. So this bill ensures that our community, particularly our most vulnerable populations, are protected from the cumulative environmental harm caused by these operations. It requires them to assess and mitigate adverse impacts, promote environmental justice, and ensure equitable participation in the decision-making process, which is key for us. It ensures that our residents will have a seat at the table when it comes to planning significant port actions. I do want to acknowledge that the airport is a huge economic driver for our region. Their passenger volumes actually reached record levels in 2024, breaking pre-pandemic growth. So business should not be a concern. This bill ensures that the port must respond to the growth in a thoughtful and environmentally just way, and that growth should not come at the expense of my community or my children's health. Senate Bill 5652 will help ensure a more just system, especially when the port has proposed significant expansions amounting to 31 near-term projects in our community, which includes a new terminal. So this bill ensures communities impacted by the airport have a voice in the decisions that affect them. And so that is why I am here in support, and I am urging you all to support Senate Bill 5652 and stand with airport communities like the city of Sea-Tac. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Councilmember Naguse. I just had a quick question. So when the port and the airport were testifying, they were talking about that they were been doing a lot of really good work in their projects, and they have some of this also scheduled out. What are your thoughts about that? Because I'm sure you've heard some of this as well.
Yeah, so when they released the SAMP, we had about approximately 60 days to review thousands of pages of documents and respond and to offer input on those proposed projects. And so it doesn't seem like an equitable and thoughtful approach to the growth And I'm not opposed to growth, right? But I believe it should be done in a thoughtful way, in an authentic way, where we are able to actually influence the decisions that are being made at the port level.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Could we have John Worthington? Oh, sorry, Steve Edmondson, you're right there. Please go ahead, and then we'll have John Worthington on deck.
And thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. And I certainly would invite those exact same questions, Senator Slatter and Senator Harris, if you have them in mind when I'm done. My name is Steve Edmiston. I live in Des Moines. I'm just south of Sea-Tac Airport. I've been active in supporting airport communities for nearly a decade. I recently served 3 years as an appointee to the Civil Aviation Coordinating Commission, and which, as you know, was sunset before we could achieve our final goal of providing a recommendation for a new airport site. I'm here today to support Senate Bill 5652. I want to thank Senator Orwell and the other senators that have sponsored this bill. The communities around Sea-Tac Airport have been disproportionately harmed by the public health and the environmental harms from aviation for a very, very long time. This bill reflects a common sense, a balanced and science-driven approach to identifying and addressing public health and environmental inequities that are being created by aviation. One of the best things about this bill is that it requires the qualifying port districts, in this case we'll say Sea-Tac Airport, to include an environmental justice implementation plan. Implementation means action. We've been wanting action for decades, to identify and reduce environmental health disparities. This actually helps solve a fundamental flaw in our federal scheme right now, and that is many of our environmental and public health laws, they date back to the 1970s, and they're grossly outdated. And what's happening now is those standards for air pollution and for noise, instead of helping the citizens, are being used to hurt the citizens, to allow growth to comply with those old standards. And we now know from science that's not sufficient. We need this help. I note that this failure to address these current scientific standards is precisely the point made by the Environmental Protection Agency back in December of 2024, and I'll quote what they wrote about the expansion plan. They said, after reviewing the Sea-Tac environmental assessment, the EPA has identified public health and environmental quality concerns about the potential projects to the communities and environmental justice concerns. The EPA is behind this bill implicitly. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. And you mentioned being able to respond to some of the earlier questions, and certainly please send that in writing.
Okay.
I don't see questions.
Any questions?
Here. No, not at the moment, but thank you. Okay. Could we have John Worthington, please? And I think we might have Anthony Holland. I'm not sure. On deck?
No.
Go ahead, John.
John Worthington, Squim. I'm going to testify against the bill. Imagine it's 1975. You got 10,000 people living there in Sea-Tac, and there's talk of a 10-mile, 5-mile radius cancer problem. And then the Growth Management Act comes along, and we got to build up and not out. All of a sudden, we can't. And my dad, I lived at 716 South 186 with my father, and that's just on the other side of the airport. He's expected to get bought out at any time. And that house is still there. Those people should not be there. They knew back then there was a cancer radius problem back in the 70s. The Growth Management Act and then Sound Transit brought in all this development, and it was a mistake. There was plans to use the 515 and go to South Center. Huge mistake. All those people that made that decision to take it to the airport and not take it to South Center, it was a big mistake. You had a chance to buy out 10,000 people. Now there's 30,000 there that shouldn't be there. They should have aimed it towards the water. They're not that far from the water. They could have done a lot of things. But there shouldn't be people there. They've known there shouldn't be people there. University of Washington comes in a day late and a dollar short. Years later, after Sound Transit and the Growth Management Act brought a bunch of people there. They already knew there was a problem. They should have just bought those people out. There's no other way around it. There's no mixing the peanut butter and the chocolate and complaining about Reese's peanut butter cups because you made a bad planning decision And no other place there's no city of LAX. The city of Sea-Tac probably shouldn't even be a city. And it should just be Tequila like it was. When they created that opened the door for the Growth Management Act. Can't build out, we got to build up. And they piled on the residents there instead of buying them out. Go to the U.S. government and get the money, buy them out. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. No questions. I don't think Anthony Holen is here, so do we have Buck Taft? Can you hear me? If you can hear me, Mr. Taft, please go ahead and unmute. Staff, any luck? No?
There, you got me?
Oh, there we go. We got you.
Sorry, the invitation was hidden behind all the things I had open on my computer.
You had to find us. Thank you so much for digging through. Good to see you and hear you. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the committee for having me today. My name is Buck Taft. I'm the airport director of the Tri-Cities Airport and also a member of the Commercial Aviation Work Group. I'm here to ask that you oppose Senate Bill 5652. The Tri-Cities Airport is the third largest commercial service airport in the state behind Seattle and Spokane. The Tri-Cities Airport currently has 8 flights a day to Seattle and is served by both Delta and Alaska. In passenger numbers, this is approximately 150,000 passengers a year, or 400 a day, and that's coming and going. Seattle is a significant driver of commercial aviation for the state of Washington. The Port of Seattle Sustainable Airport Master Plan is extremely important to our community, our state, our region, and the world. Any delay in the ability for the Port of Seattle to complete the SAMP in a timely manner will not only impact Seattle, but all airports that currently serve the Seattle area. With that, the Port of Pasco and Tri-Cities Airport opposed to Senate Bill 5652, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you so much for testifying. I don't see any questions, and it appears the last 2 testifiers are not in Zoom. So with that, I'm just going to look over at staff to confirm that. Okay, great. So with that, I'm going to close the hearing at SB 5652. Thank you for your attention and engagement. And with that, we're going to close the hearing and meeting is adjourned.